questions are being asked from this section. The questions asked are simple, but they're not that easy. You need to understand the topic properly to know the answer as well. And then it's something like, you cannot mug up all the facts, you cannot memorize each and every event, but yes, you can correlate and then reach the right answer. It's something like elimination factor when it comes to multiple choice questions. Similarly, when you are attempting the mains and you're writing a long answer on the section on art and culture, your general understanding is expected by UPSC. It's not that you mug up all the facts and you produce a fact-ridden answer. That would make sense, but that's not the requirement here. You need to understand it in a holistic manner. Culture in itself is a quite vast aspect. It's a detailed aspect of every society. In order to know about culture, you should be able to understand the different aspects of culture, things which make culture the way we know it today. So with this basic idea, we'll begin this section, and as we'll proceed further with the discussion, I'll let you know from time to time what type of questions have been asked and what should be the probable approach of a student while attempting these questions. For example, if you check the mains prelims question paper, you'll find that there were questions which were talking of subsects of popular religious sects, say for example Buddhism and Jainism. Then similarly there was a question on the cave paintings. Avalokiteshvar was questioned over there. Then popular fairs and festivals were asked. So most of the times you'll find that these things figure in some current affairs topic, but that's the reason why they figure in the question paper, that in order to know them, you should be able to understand the very concept of culture, what's the correlation, what's the idea, and the general sense is that if you know the other four options, all the four options, you'll be able to reach the right answer as such. So with this basic idea, we'll begin, and as already told to you, from time to time we'll let you know what are the expectations from that particular section, what should be the approach of a student, and what all things should be kept in mind while preparing for that particular section. The lecture today is an overview of the entire paper on Indian art and culture, and it deals with both prelims and mains perspectives. So we have tried to make it as comprehensive and as easy to understand for students. So since this is an overview, so we'll talk of the entire paper, and here we go. Indian art and culture. The very introduction to this section expects us to know what does art and culture mean. In order to know art and culture of a society, we should know history as well. Now, in order to know a society better, we should know the different factors which gave birth to that society, how that particular society comes into existence, what are the reasons, what are the factors which converge together to make the society what we see it today. As we all know, Indian society is one of the oldest societies in this world. If we talk of Harappan civilization, our society is as old as Mesopotamian society, Egyptian, or even Chinese society. So if a society is quite old, certainly it will have a richer historical sense of that particular society. And then besides this, it will have several attributes or several factors which can be termed cultural. Now the term culture is a very vast concept. Each and everything falls within its purview. But then we should be able to understand how this particular culture evolves, how it develops, why certain practices become prominent cultural practices, and why certain cultural practices do not gain that prominence. In the same discussion, we can talk of another factor. Like, for example, some particular cultural trait gains popularity in a particular period, but as time passes, gradually that feature starts losing its popularity. It's no more popular amongst the masses, it's no more popular among the people, and gradually the practices are disowned by the society. Similarly, there were certain practices, say for example sati practice, which was a part of Indian tradition, culture and heritage for several generations. But as time passed by, as people learnt more and more about human rights, human sensibilities, the idea of sensitivity came in. So this practice was banned during colonial times. Similarly, there were many more practices which can be termed as cultural, which are no more practiced today. Sometimes certain negative aspects have been associated with culture, say for example untouchability or ostracization or even marginalization on a periodic basis. So some people tend to club these things as well as a part of culture. So we should be careful that culture is a larger picture. The picture includes many things, positive, negative, everything. We are not saying that culture is bad. We are just saying that we need to understand that it's a vast umbrella-like concept which covers many factors, many attributes, and these attributes should be discussed in their own right. Like, for example, how they evolved, what was the idea of having that particular practice in that particular region or that particular period, etc. etc. Okay, so we go by the definition of history. History is generally defined as a study of the past, but which past? If we are talking of past, we're also talking of cultural past, or the past of culture as well, past of art as well. So history, as we all know, has been written down, or things which have been recorded has come down to us in the form of history. Say for example, inscriptions, coins, epigraphs, books, or different literary traditions, religious books, secular books, autobiographies, biographies, etc. These are the sources of history. So if we are talking of sources of history, similarly they are sources of knowing the cultural past as well, or sources which tell us about the different cultures. Interestingly, most of the sources which talk of culture are not chronicled properly. They are tangible and intangible heritage objects. Say for example, dance forms or folk songs. They haven't been digitalized or recorded, or rather chronicled in a proper manner. These are available in bits and pieces, in fragments, and we need to club them together to reach a proper understanding. Now, if we talk of sources of history, they have certain biasness. For example, biasness of the author is always there when we look at a particular text. Autobiographies might be biased since the person is himself relating the life. Very few autobiographies might be 100% neutral, or say free from biases or prejudices which an individual often have towards certain things. Similarly, when we are talking of cultural things and the sources, we should understand that different regions have different takes or different understandings of different cultural attributes. Dance, for example, may be quite popular in a particular society, may not be popular in a particular society. Musical instruments may be associated with certain sections of a society, may not be quite popular in another section of the society. So these distinctions should always be kept in mind when we are talking of culture. So the standard definition of history says that it's a systematic study of the past, making use of the available and authentic sources. These sources can be of different types and varieties, different genres. For the sake of convenience, they are clubbed as literary sources, archaeological sources, epigraphical sources, or numismatic sources. Similarly, when we are talking of culture, the sources are many. Most of the times, these sources are not written down or clubbed together in the form of standard chronicles, and as already told to you, these are available in bits and pieces and we need to look at them. Similarly, there is a general understanding of concepts like culture and civilization. Our contemporary literature, say for example popular literature available in newspapers, journals and magazines, tends to use these terms interchangeably. But since we are doing a section on art and culture, we should understand that there is a difference between culture and civilization. In Indian context, culture refers to the achievements of Indian society right since human beings evolved here. Say for example the Stone Ages. All the achievements of human societies here are taken to be as cultural achievements of Indian society. Similarly, when we talk of civilization, civilization refers to those particular sections or periods in a particular culture when the society which is being talked about has made substantial progress. Say for example, during Harappan period or Harappan civilization, human society made lots of progress when it came to urbanization. Several urban factors like town planning, drainage, the idea of making wells, etc. developed in this period. So this period is termed as civilizational period when it comes to urbanization. Similarly, when we talk of Vedic age, we find that Sanskrit prospered and developed. Lots of popular texts were written down in Sanskrit. Say for example Rigved, Samved, etc. So when we talk of literary traditions, Vedic age is given this credit of developing the ideas of Vedas or the literary traditions in Indian past. Similarly, when we talk of Gupta period, you find that Kalidas wrote many texts, and Kalidas was not the sole writer. There were many more people like Amar Singh, etc. So they wrote in Sanskrit, and this phase, that is the Gupta period, is known as the classical age for Sanskrit literature in India. Similarly, when we talk of post-Gupta centuries, that is 6th to 12th centuries, we find that regional literature developed. Languages like Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam, Bengali, etc. started developing in this period. They evolved, and gradually by the time of 14th, 15th century, they were full-fledged language traditions in their own right. So we say that in different period, different cultural attributes developed, prospered and flourished. So in short, we can say that culture is not time-bound, it's an unending process, while civilization is a time-bound process. It originates, develops, matures and comes to an end. So one particular culture can involve several phases of civilization. So in this section, when we are talking of art and culture, we'll understand that different attributes of civilization. Say for example, dance, classical dance. It's not the result of a particular period, it's the result of several generations. Ideas of several generations have been clubbed together, they have come together, and the end product which we find today, it's actually a result of interactions, dialogues which has happened over generations, and that's why we say that both of them are interrelated to each other. Similarly, culture is of different types. There is a standard culture, then there is a popular culture, folk culture, etc. The difference between standard and popular is quite simple and interesting as well. Things which have a limited audience are often termed as standard, or things which belong to the masses are often termed as popular. Now this differentiation is not a rigid differentiation. It might happen that practices which are standard in a particular period may become popular in the coming generation. Say for example, talking in English. It was a standard practice during colonial times. Nowadays it has become. Now we proceed further to the geographical background of Indian history and culture. India, as we all know, is a subcontinent with a great expanse. Indian geography is also a unique thing in its own right. We have large number of seasons coming here, which we don't find in other places. The different seasonal variations have given birth to different cultural attributes, particularly folk songs. If we look at these folk songs, we find that the sense of season change or nature's overall structure gets reflected in these different folk attributes. Similarly, dressing patterns, eating habits, cooking habits, all these things have been influenced by geography, seasonal change, climate, etc. We talk of concepts of natural boundary. If we talk of the entire subcontinent, it has a nice natural boundary, particularly the peninsular part, where we have two water bodies, the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, and to the south the Indian Ocean, providing a natural boundary to the entire subcontinent. In the north we have Himalayas, which separates Indian subcontinent from China, and to the east we have Brahmaputra river, and beyond Brahmaputra the Purvachal hills, which again provide a nice natural boundary from Myanmar or Burma. And then in the west we find that the extensions of Hindu Kush ranges, they provide a natural boundary to some extent. Now we are talking of subcontinent prior to 1947. After 1947 we find Pakistan and Bangladesh coming into picture. So in history we are generally talking of phases when this entire subcontinent was free from post-partition developments. Okay, now in this background we'll talk of artistic activities. So somewhere you will find that there is a great deal of diversity which is spread all over the subcontinent. This spread is not even, it's an uneven spread, and in this unevenness we find that there is a certain sense of unity. Somewhere the different variations, they all come and merge into a larger unity, and that's why we call it Indian culture or Indian artistic traditions. Despite or along with the regional variations, there is an underlying sense of unity. So that's the basic point which we are talking of in this slide in the overview section. So we have historical growth of present political boundaries. Political entities are not historically created. They come up with certain developments. Say for example, regions like Bengal, Malwa, Awadh, they were not there right since times immemorial. Political and administrative activities have actually given birth. And a very good example is the coming up of East and West Bengal. With the partition of Bengal province, these two new regions came up, and that's why a new regional identity comes up. So what we say that these regional entities did not exist since times immemorial. Certain political changes, certain administrative factors, sometimes dynastic rule over a particular region gave birth to these ideas or these concepts. Now there is a significant role which geography plays in the trajectory of historical growth. We are talking of historical growth so that we are able to understand the process of cultural growth. History and culture go hand in hand. Different geographical regions, say for example coastal belts, have their cultures fashioned or developed according to their own distinct geography. If we take the example of coastal areas, fishing is a very prominent activity there. So if you look at their culture, their tradition, the symbolic representation of fish would be very prominent. The metaphor of using fish would be very prominent. In their dance forms, in their songs, in their folk songs, you'll find that fishing would somehow find a substantial place and would be covering a larger section of the cultural picture over there. Similarly, when we look at hilly societies or societies where sunlight doesn't reach easily, so sun will have a very different role to play in their cultural perspectives. Similarly, societies which were there on the frontiers, which had seen lots of warfare, will have a different sense of martial spirit in their folk culture. If we talk of northwestern parts of Indian subcontinent, they have observed, or rather they have experienced lots of invasions right since the times of Darius I and Alexander, and it continues over the period of time, and we find that Muhammad Ghaznavi, Mahmud Ghaznavi, Muhammad Ghori, and lots of invaders coming through these passes. So in this region, you'll find that this warfare or this idea of invasion has actually played a crucial role in fashioning or giving birth to their cultural idea of martial spirit. Like mothers would pray for valiant sons, brave sons who could fight and save the honor of the land. Similarly, when we look at coastal areas, we find that in their traditions, maritime trade or the coming of merchant ships finds a good manifestation or a prominent place. Similarly, if we look at agricultural societies, where agriculture was a prominent phenomena, in their cultural attributes, we'll find that sowing, reaping, harvesting, and storing the grain, these things find a larger role. Similarly, when we talk of religious developments in our extended lecture, we'll see that how agricultural societies looked at fertility cults, what was their understanding of different gods, different understandings. Similarly, when we look at Sangam age, we'll see that how different deities are talked of there, how their attributes are associated with different geographical perspectives. Similarly, hunter-gatherer societies of central India, how they have perceived culture, what is their idea of culture. So all these things are necessary and should certainly be kept in mind. One good illustration comes up with the hunting scenes which you find in the Mesolithic cave paintings. In most of these cave paintings, predominantly hunting scenes are shown. Now we are talking of geography or the ecological setting of these cultural attributes. If we say that these cave paintings which you find at Bhimbetka and other places of Mesolithic times, if we call them a cultural product, so what things are influencing this cultural product? The economic activity and the ecological setting of this economic activity. So that's what we are trying to point out here, that this geography has played a very crucial role in fashioning this culture. Similarly, when we look at temple building styles which developed from post-Gupta centuries, at most of the places, temples have been constructed in land which was not very fertile agriculturally. And the material which is used is most of the times locally available material. And the style of the temple actually suits the local requirement. Like in hilly areas, we find that the roof of the temple, despite being in the same Nagar style, is actually conical in order to ensure that during heavy snowfall or rainfall, the temple structure doesn't get affected. Similarly, when we look at places where in the plains, we find that flat roofs are also there in most of the structures where proper drainage facilities are there. Similarly, wooden structures are there in areas where space constraints are there or where naturally occurring stones are not available. We find that bricks are used for construction. And a very classic example is the alluvial plain, where we find very less number of stone structures and more brick structures. So that's what we are trying to discuss here, that how geography or ecological setting has impacted the cultural attributes. If we look at flora and fauna again, you will see that lots of things get reflected there as well. Peacocks, for example, are very popular in the motifs in Western India, particularly Gujarat and Rajasthan. If we look at their iconography, we'll find peacock has been shown in a predominant manner. Similarly, the colors associated with peacock, the bright colors, has been used most of the times in their artistic activities. So this is what we are trying to say. And we can say that history of frontier areas is most of the times history of warfare, while history